My sister sent a text to the entire family group chat 2 days before my father's 70th birthday party. It said, and I'm going to read this to you word for word because I need you to feel what I felt when I saw it. It said, "Don't invite Helen and her family. We're all sick of them. Dad agrees. Just don't come, Helen. You ruin everything." And the worst part? The timestamp on that message was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I had just finished wrapping my father's birthday gift. A leather-bound journal I had searched 3 months for because he once told me, when I was 9 years old, that he wanted to write down his memories before he forgot them. I remembered. I always remembered. My hands were still sticky from the tape on the wrapping paper when my phone lit up with that notification. 47 family members were in that group chat. 47 people saw that message before I did. And not one of them said a single word in my defense. Not one. Stay with me. Because what happens next, what my husband did, what the paperwork revealed, and what my sister never ever saw coming, is the reason I'm sitting here today with tears in my eyes and a smile on my face at the same time. Because this story doesn't end in my kitchen at midnight with a broken heart. It ends in a way that even I couldn't have scripted. Stay until the very end. You're going to want to see how this lands. Before I go any further, I just want to say, if you've ever been the person in your family who is always too much, never enough, and somehow always the problem, please subscribe. Your support means everything, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. Hit that subscribe button right now. And please stay because this story is just getting started, and trust me, the ending is worth everything. My name is Helen, I'm 37 years old and I live in Boston, Massachusetts, with my husband Elijah and our 2 children, our son Marcellus, who is 10, and our daughter Alice, who is 7. We live in a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood where Marcellus rides his bike after school, and Alice draws chalk flowers on the sidewalk. It is not a perfect life, but it is ours, and we built it together, Elijah and I, from practically nothing, from student loans and double shifts and skipped vacations and grocery lists calculated to the dollar. Elijah works in civil engineering. He is the quietest, most methodical person I have ever met in my life. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't make threats, he doesn't waste words. When Elijah speaks, it means something. When Elijah goes quiet, truly quiet, it means something even more. I work as a medical records administrator for a hospital network in Boston. It's not glamorous, but I am very, very good at it. I know how systems work, I know how paperwork moves, I know how to follow a paper trail. That skill set, it turns out, was about to become the most important weapon I never knew I had. Now let me tell you about my family. My father's name is Thomas. He is the kindest man I have ever known, a retired school teacher who coached youth baseball for 22 years and still remembers every student he ever taught by first name. He turned 70 this past spring, and for months the family had been planning a party for him, a real one. Catered food, a live band, a slideshow of photographs going back to his childhood. The whole thing was organized at the home of my sister Holly and her husband Brad. Holly is 41. She is 4 years older than me and has spent the majority of those 4 years reminding me of it. Holly married Brad when she was 28, and Brad comes from what our family calls comfortable money. He doesn't need to work in the way the rest of us work. They live in a large house in Connecticut. They take 2 vacations a year. Their daughter Camille is 15 and has never once been told the word no in a tone that meant anything. For as long as I can remember, Holly has been the family's sun. Everything orbited her. Every holiday, every decision, every conversation somehow returned to what Holly thought, what Holly wanted, what Holly deserved. And for a long time I accepted that. I accepted it because my father loved her, and I loved my father. I accepted it because my mother, God rest her soul, she passed when I was 24. She used to squeeze my hand at Christmas dinner when Holly would say something cutting and whisper, "She doesn't mean it, baby, she just needs to feel important." And I would nod and pass the rolls and swallow whatever Holly had just said. My mother isn't here to squeeze my hand anymore. And somewhere between losing her and turning 37, I stopped swallowing. I need to give you context, because this story didn't start with one text message. That text message was the final document in a very long file that had been building for years. It started small, the way these things always do. When Elijah and I got married 11 years ago, Holly told everyone at the rehearsal dinner that she didn't think we were ready. She didn't whisper it. She said it to my Aunt Jane and my cousin Dante loud enough that I heard it from 2 tables away. When I confronted her about it the next morning, she looked me in the eye and said, "I'm just being honest, Helen. You've always been too sensitive." When I had Marcellus, Holly came to visit and spent 45 minutes explaining to me that I was holding him wrong, that my house wasn't organized for a newborn, that Elijah should have taken more time off work. When Elijah got his promotion, a significant one we had worked toward for years, Holly's response at Sunday dinner was to pivot the conversation to Brad's investment portfolio within 4 minutes. I counted. When Alice was born and we announced her name, Holly called it unusual. She wanted me to name her after our grandmother. When I didn't, the coolness between us dropped another degree. These things pile up. They sit in your chest like stones, each one small enough to explain away, but collectively heavy enough to change your posture, to make you smaller, to make you quieter, to make you feel like you are always one wrong word away from being uninvited from your own family. And there were others who participated in it. My cousin Paulson, who is Holly's age and has been her best friend since childhood, who laughed at every joke Holly made at my expense. My Uncle Joe, who is my father's brother, who never liked Elijah because Elijah is black, and Joe is Joe, and I'll leave it at that. My cousin Kyle, who once told Marcellus that kids who go to public school don't have the same opportunities, at a family Easter in front of everyone, to my 10-year-old son. Elijah absorbed all of it with that quiet of his. He would take my hand under the table. He would steer Marcellus away from conversations before they could wound him too deeply. He would catch my eye across a room full of relatives and give me the smallest nod that meant, "I see it, I'm here, we're okay, Arsa." But I knew that somewhere inside that quiet man, a record was being kept. Elijah keeps records of everything. My father's 70th birthday was the kind of milestone that a family is supposed to gather for, and I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to contribute. I reached out to Holly in February, the party was in April, and asked how I could help. She said she had it handled. I offered to contribute financially. Elijah and I had set aside money specifically for this. She said they didn't need it. I offered to reach out to relatives out of state to coordinate travel. She said she'd already done it. Every single offer deflected, not rudely, not explosively, just smoothly, efficiently, in a way that left no opening. I started to feel, slowly, that I was being managed, kept at arm's length from the planning so that when the event happened, my contribution to it would be showing up. I told Elijah this one night in March, sitting at our kitchen table after the kids were in bed. He listened the way he always listens, completely still, eyes steady on mine. When I finished, he said, "Helen, do you trust your instincts?" I said yes. He said, "Then trust them, and document everything." I didn't know what he meant yet, but I wrote it down. I kept our text thread with Holly. I kept the family group chat history. I kept notes with dates and times, the way I do at work when there's a complicated case, methodical, time-stamped, without emotion. And then the text came. Tuesday, April 9th, 11:47 p.m. I was in the living room, sitting on the floor with the birthday gift in my lap. The journal had a deep brown leather cover with my father's initials embossed on the front, K.H. Thomas Arthur Hale. I had driven to 3 different stores to find it. I had a calligrapher write a dedication page inside. I had printed small photographs of my father across different decades, young, laughing, coaching baseball, holding Marcellus for the first time, and placed them in a little envelope tucked inside the front cover. My phone buzzed. The preview in the notification read, "Don't invite Helen and..." I opened the chat. Holly had sent the message to the family group chat, all 47 members, and she had said, "I need to read this slowly so you feel every word." I think we all need to be honest. Dad's birthday should be a good day. Helen always makes things about herself and her family has been a source of tension for years. Elijah makes people uncomfortable. The kids are out of control. I've spoken to Dad and he agrees it would be better if they just didn't come. Helen, please just stay home. We're all sick of the drama. This is for Dad's sake. Thank you. I sat on the floor and I read it 4 times. The journal was still in my lap. I could feel the embossed initials under my fingers. And then the responses started coming in. My cousin Paulson, Holly's right, this has been a long time coming. My Uncle Joe, agreed, ABSA. My cousin Dante, who I had always considered my ally, who had eaten at my table and played with my kids, Dante said, sorry Helen, but she has a point. There were 47 people in that chat. 22 of them responded. Of those 22, 18 agreed with Holly. 3 said nothing, which I later understood was its own kind of response. 1 person defended me. 1. Her name was Marvel. She's my father's cousin, in her late 60s, a woman who lives in Georgia and has always been the quiet moral center of our extended family. Marvel typed, this is not right, you don't do family this way. All 22 responses, and only Marvel. I didn't respond that night. I put the phone face down on the carpet. I sat with that journal in my hands in the dark for a long time. And then I did something I hadn't done since my mother died. I cried the kind of cry that comes from a place below grief, from the place where you keep all the things you've convinced yourself didn't really hurt that much. All the dinners, all the comments, all the gracious swallowing, all the stones. They came out all at once. Elijah found me there. He came downstairs for water and found me on the floor and didn't say a word. He just sat down beside me and took the journal out of my hands and held it for me. And we sat there on the floor together until the crying stopped. Then he read the texts. And something in Elijah's face, that quiet, still face, changed in a way I had never seen before. He set the phone down. He looked at the journal. He looked at the initials on the cover. And he said, very quietly, just 7 words. Helen, I need you to trust me. I want to pause right here and just say, if this story is hitting close to home, if you know what it feels like to be pushed out of your own family, to be the one everyone blames, to cry on the floor after everyone else is asleep, please subscribe right now, please. Your support means everything to me, and it reminds me I'm not alone in this. And please keep watching, because what Elijah does next, I need you to see this. I need you to stay. There is a specific kind of danger in a quiet man's silence. I knew Elijah was upset. I had never, in 11 years of marriage, seen him look the way he looked that night. But he didn't curse. He didn't make a phone call at midnight. He didn't fire off a response in the group chat. He closed the kitchen blinds, made me a cup of tea and said, go to bed. I need to think. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and listened to the sound of Elijah moving around downstairs. The soft click of his laptop opening, the low sound of him on the phone, then quiet. Then typing again. At around 2 a.m, he came upstairs and got into bed, and I felt his hand find mine in the dark. It's going to be okay, he said. How? I asked. Because Holly made a very significant mistake. I waited. She put it in writing, he said, in a group chat, with 47 witnesses. I still didn't fully understand. Not yet. The next morning, Elijah sat me down at the kitchen table before the kids were awake. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him with notes written in his careful, precise handwriting. He pushed his glasses up and looked at me and said, Helen, I need to tell you some things that I haven't said out loud before. About Holly, about the property, about what Brad said to me at your cousin Kyle's wedding 2 years ago. I straightened. He said, Brad told me, casually like it was nothing, that your father had changed his estate documents, that he'd spoken to a lawyer your sister recommended, that the house, your father's house in Weston, had been placed in a family trust with Holly as the primary trustee. I went cold. Elijah, when did he tell you this? 2 years ago. I smiled and changed the subject because I didn't want to upset you. But I went home and I did my research. And Helen, some of what Brad described doesn't match what your father told you about his estate plan. My father had told me, explicitly, the year after my mother died, sitting in his kitchen in Weston over coffee, that the house would be divided equally between Holly and me. That was what my mother had wanted. He had told me he'd had it drawn up. But according to Brad's casual revelation at a wedding, something had changed. And my sister had helped make it change. Here is where my job became my weapon. I am a medical records administrator. My entire professional life is built on one premise: documents don't lie. Paper trails don't disappear. Systems leave records even when people try to erase them. Elijah had already started pulling on the thread. He had spoken to a friend of ours, Anthony, who is a real estate attorney, on a purely informal basis the morning after the text. Anthony agreed to look into the public property records for my father's house. What he found was simple, clean, and devastating. 18 months prior, the deed to my father's home in Weston had been transferred into a family trust. The trust document named Holly Bradford, my sister, using her married name, as the sole trustee with what is called a power of appointment, meaning she could ultimately determine how the assets were distributed. My father was listed as the beneficiary during his lifetime, but after his death, the distribution of the property's value was entirely at Holly's discretion. The lawyer who had drawn up the documents was named Smith. His firm was in Hartford, Connecticut, 40 minutes from Holly and Brad's house. My father had no attorney of his own present at that signing. There was no independent counsel. He had signed those documents 14 months ago. I called my father the morning Anthony shared this information with us. It was the hardest phone call I have ever made. My father is 70 years old. He retired after 30 years of teaching. He trusts people. He trusted his oldest daughter. I did not accuse. I did not yell. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot during my lunch break and I said, "Dad, I need to ask you something. When you had your estate documents updated, did you understand that the house was being put in a trust with Holly as the person who controls it?" A pause. A long pause. And then my father said, "Helen, Holly said, that's just how they do it now, to avoid probate. She said it was better for taxes. She said you'd get your share." His voice was confused, uncertain, like a man who was starting to question a step he had taken on what he thought was solid ground. I said, "Dad, did you have your own lawyer review those documents?" Another pause. Holly said Smith was handling everything. He seemed very professional. I closed my eyes. Smith was Holly's family's attorney. He had drafted documents that made Holly the sole trustee of my father's most significant asset, and my father, my kind, trusting baseball coaching father, had signed them without independent counsel because his oldest daughter had smiled and said it was just paperwork. I said, "Dad, I need you to listen to me. I need you to hear me the way you heard me when I was little, and I came to you with something important, okay?" He said, "Okay, baby." I said, "I think you need your own lawyer." Here is what Holly expected to happen. She expected me to stay home. She expected that text to land and wound and silence me. She expected me to send some tearful apology or a furious rebuttal that she could screenshot and use as evidence that I was, in fact, dramatic and difficult. She expected my father's 70th birthday to proceed without me, and for my father, who she had carefully managed for at least 2 years, to not notice my absence too keenly, or to accept whatever explanation she offered. That is what she expected. Here is what actually happened. Elijah called my father on Thursday morning, 2 days before the party, and asked if he could come visit. Just the two of them, man to man. My father said yes immediately. Elijah drove to Weston. He brought the text screenshot printed on paper. He brought the property records that Anthony had found, also printed, highlighted in yellow. He sat at my father's kitchen table, the same table where I had that phone call, and he laid the documents out quietly, one at a time, and walked my father through everything. He did not editorialize. He did not attack Holly. He said, "Thomas, I love your daughter and I love you. I'm showing you this because you deserve to know what's been done, not because I want anything from it." My father is a man who spent 30 years teaching children to read. He looked at those documents, he read them carefully, he turned them over and read the backs. He sat with them for a long time. Then he called his own attorney, not Smith, his own. The attorney's name was Hass. He was a retired judge who had been my father's friend since before I was born, who had handled small matters for our family for decades. My father called him from the kitchen while Elijah sat at the table and didn't say a word. On the day of the birthday party, my father called Holly. I don't know exactly what was said on that call. My father is a private man. But I know it lasted 47 minutes. I know that at the end of it, Holly called Elijah's phone, not mine, Elijah's, and screamed at him for 15 minutes. Elijah held the phone slightly away from his ear and let her finish, and then said, in that quiet way of his, "Holly, this conversation is being noted. Have a good evening." He hung up. My father called me at 8 o'clock that Friday night. The party was the next day. He said, "Helen, I want you there, I want my grandchildren there, and I need you to do something for me." I said, "Anything." He said, "Bring that journal." I won't pretend it wasn't hard to walk into that house. Holly and Brad's home in Connecticut is large and well-appointed, and smells like money in a way that always made me feel slightly smaller just walking through the front door. On the morning of April 12th, I stood in the driveway with Elijah's hand in my right hand and Alice's hand in my left, and Marcellus beside Elijah, and I breathed. Elijah looked at me. I looked at him. We went in. The silence that fell when I walked into that room was the kind that has weight. Paulson stopped mid-sentence. Kyle's jaw tightened. Uncle Joe looked away. Dante, to his credit, looked ashamed. Genuinely, deeply ashamed, and could not meet my eyes. Holly was in the kitchen when we arrived. Brad was at the bar. My father was in the living room, surrounded by grandchildren and old friends. And when he saw me, when he saw Alice running toward him with her arms wide open, he stood up from his chair and his face did something I hadn't seen it do in years. It broke open. He held Alice so tightly. He shook Marcellus's hand like a man, and then pulled him into a hug. He clasped Elijah's shoulder, and then he held my face in both of his hands, those big, weathered teacher's hands, and he looked at me and said, quietly, so only I could hear, "I'm sorry, Helen, I am so sorry." I had promised myself I wouldn't cry until later. I broke that promise immediately. The party proceeded. Holly was present, impeccably dressed, perfectly composed in that way she has always been, greeting guests and directing caterers and steering the narrative. But something was different now, and everyone in that room could feel it without being able to name it. The air around Holly had shifted. Because my father, at his own 70th birthday party in front of every single person who had seen that text message, stood up and said, without prompting, without a script, in the middle of the dinner, "I want to say something." The room went quiet. He said, "I want to thank my daughter Helen and her husband Elijah for being here tonight. I want them to know, and I want everyone in this room to know, that they are welcome at my table, always, at any table I sit at, and I love them." He looked at me. He said, "Helen, can you come here?" I walked across that room with every eye on me and stood beside my father, and he put his arm around me and he held out his other hand. "I believe you brought something for me," he said. I reached into my bag and took out the journal. He took it. He turned it over in his hands. He ran his thumb across the embossed initials. He opened it and found the dedication page and the photographs. His hands were shaking slightly. He pressed it to his chest. And then he looked at the room and said, "This is my daughter, this is my family." 47 people. The same 47 who had seen that text message. And this time the room was silent for a very different reason. I want to be careful here. I want to be honest about what justice looks like when it is quiet and procedural, rather than dramatic and explosive. Holly did not fall apart publicly that night. She smiled and pivoted and managed, the way she always has. She found me in the kitchen near the end of the evening and said, in a low voice, "You've turned Dad against his own family." I looked at her for a moment, and then I said, "Holly, Your attorney drew up documents that gave you control of Dad's house without independent counsel. That's not me turning anyone against anyone, that's paperwork. I walked away. In the weeks that followed, my father worked with Haas to have the trust documents reviewed and ultimately amended. It was a complicated process. Smith's firm pushed back. Brad made several phone calls. Holly sent my father a 12-page letter. I'm not exaggerating, Elijah saw it, accusing me of manipulating an elderly man. My father is 70, not confused. He has a master's degree in education. He coached youth baseball for 22 years. He reads 3 books a month. He is not a man who is easily manipulated. But he is a man who loves his children and trusted the wrong one for too long. Haas ultimately helped my father establish a new estate arrangement, one reviewed independently, one that reflected what he had always told me, that the house would be divided equally. That arrangement is now documented, witnessed, notarized, and filed. Holly contested it. The contest went nowhere. The family group chat, the one with 47 members where the text had been sent, went silent for 6 weeks. Then, one by one, people began reaching out to me privately. Dante was first. He called me and apologized for nearly 30 minutes and cried in a way I hadn't expected. I listened. I didn't offer absolution immediately because some things need to be processed before they can be forgiven, but I listened. Marvel called from Georgia and said, I've been watching that family for 40 years and I always knew there was something off. I'm glad it came out. Paulson has not reached out. Kyle has not reached out. Uncle Joe has not reached out. That is fine. Some relationships are more honestly described as associations, and associations can end without tragedy. I have to tell you about Elijah, because this story belongs to him as much as it belongs to me. The morning after the birthday party, I made breakfast while the kids slept in, and Elijah sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and his legal pad, the same one with the notes from that night after the text. He was adding things to it, closing things out, drawing lines through items that had been resolved. I watched him from across the kitchen. I thought about the 11 years, the holiday dinners where he took my hand under the table, the way he steered Marcellus away from the sharp edges of other people's careless words. The night he sat on the floor beside me and held the journal so I could cry. The way he drove to Weston and laid out documents on my father's kitchen table without raising his voice once. I said, Elijah. He looked up. I said, how long have you been protecting me? He thought about it. He said, about as long as I've known you. I said, why didn't you say something sooner, about the property, about Brad? He was quiet for a moment, then he said, because you weren't ready. And because your relationship with your father wasn't ready, and because the right moment for the truth isn't always the moment it becomes available. I nodded. He said, Helen, you did this. You kept the records. You made the call to your father. You walked into that party. You stood beside him. I just printed some documents. He went back to his legal pad. And I stood there in the kitchen in Boston on a Saturday morning, with the sun coming through the window, and the smell of coffee and the sound of my children still sleeping upstairs. And I thought about what quiet justice actually looks like. It doesn't look like a scene. It doesn't look like a confrontation or a speech or a viral moment. It looks like a man driving to Weston on a Thursday morning with a folder of printed documents. It looks like a father at a party reaching out his hand and asking for a journal. It looks like a new set of notarized papers filed quietly in a county clerk's office. It looks like a woman standing in her kitchen knowing that what is hers is protected, that her children's legacy is protected, that her father knows the truth. It looks like peace. I've thought a lot about what I would say to someone who is living through what I lived through. Not the dramatic version, not the version where there's a confrontation in a parking lot or someone loses it in front of the whole family. The slow version. The version where you're the stone in the river and the water just keeps going around you year after year, and you start to wonder if maybe you really are the problem. Here's what I would say. Document everything. Not because you're building a case out of spite, but because memory is unreliable and paper is not. If someone sends you a message, save it. If someone makes a decision that affects you, Write it down with the date. You may never need those records. I hope you never do. But if the day comes, you'll be so grateful they exist. Trust quiet people. The people who don't perform their loyalty are often the ones most deeply committed to it. Elijah never made a speech about protecting me. He just did it, methodically, for 11 years. Look for those people. Keep them close. Lean on your one marvel. There was one person in that chat of 47 who said what was right. One marvel drove no dramatic action. She asked no questions. She just typed 4 words, "This is not right," and that was enough. Be marvel for someone else. And when you find your marvel, love them. Give your parent the truth gently. My father was not a villain in this story. He was a loving man who trusted his oldest daughter and did not ask the questions he should have asked. When I approached him, I did not lead with accusation. I led with love and evidence. There is a difference. One closes doors, the other opens them. Your children are watching. Everything I did thinking about Marcellus and Alice. I thought about what I wanted them to see me do. I wanted them to see their mother walk into a difficult room with her head up. I wanted them to see their father handle a crisis with a legal pad and a drive to Weston instead of a screaming match. I wanted them to understand that justice is usually boring from the outside and everything on the inside. And the last thing. Some people will not change. Holly is who she is. I don't say that with bitterness. Genuinely, I say it with a kind of release. The text she sent that night was not a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was an expression of who she has always been, and I cannot spend one more day of my life managing that. I cannot give her my energy, my grief, my dinner table small talk, or my children's Sunday afternoons. I can give her distance, and distance sometimes is its own kind of gift. My father called me in June, 2 months after the party. He said, "Helen, I've been writing in that journal every day." I laughed. "Yeah?" He said, "I want to read you something I wrote." I sat down. He said, "I wrote, I spent many years confusing proximity with loyalty, but loyalty is not who stands next to you. It is who stands for you when standing costs them something. My daughter Helen stood for me when I didn't even know I needed it. I will not forget that." I couldn't speak for a moment. He said, "I also wrote about the time you fell off your bike when you were 6, and instead of crying you just got back on and rode to the end of the street. I wrote about that too." I laughed and cried at the same time. He said, "This journal was the best gift I've ever received, baby girl." I said, "You helped me make it, Dad. Every time you were kind, every time you were good, that's what's in it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come visit soon, bring the kids, bring Elijah." I said, "We'll be there." And we were. And that's where it ends. Not with fireworks, not with Holly losing everything overnight, not with some dramatic public scene. It ends with my father writing in a journal on a Tuesday morning, remembering the time his 6-year-old daughter fell off her bike and got back on. It ends with Elijah and me on the couch after the kids are in bed, with the legal pad closed in a drawer somewhere, no longer needed. It ends with Alice drawing chalk flowers on the sidewalk, and Marcellus riding his bike, and our life in Boston being exactly, quietly, solidly ours. If this story moved you, please subscribe. Please. Your support means more to me than I know how to say. It reminds me that I am not alone in this, that none of us are alone in this. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who is going through a family betrayal right now, someone who is being pushed out, overlooked, dismissed, please share this video with them. Let them know that quiet justice is real, that the paperwork matters, that the right people will come through for you. And if you haven't watched my other videos, I have more stories. More of these slow, patient, deeply human moments where the underestimated finally get their moment of truth. Stay on the channel, watch them, they are all waiting for you. Thank you for staying until the end. I knew you would. Subscribe, like, share with someone who needs this today.